Right, so thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So what we're going to take a look at today is we're just going to finish off going through the learning guide and just discuss the scope of the course. And then I will show you a system that we've set up to try and help you practice the programming side of the course, which is obviously a major part of the course, in a separate way to just doing your weekly programming assignments. So the weekly programming assignments don't go away, but these are smaller, more focused exercises that will help you with the practical, and we'll also measure your participation in these exercises, and that can contribute to your practical mark to help you qualify for the course. Because one thing that is important, and I guess it's something we can start off with, is that in this course, there's actually, I suppose it's a bit later on, but it's worth mentioning, there are these various components that go into calculating your final mark. So class tests and assignments, those are your weekly practicals and anything else we ask you to do, including these shorter programming assignments. So they only count 10%. They're what we call formative assessment. So the purpose of formative assessment is to teach you a skill, not really to assess you too much on it. Now, marks can be assigned and measured and recorded for formative assessment, but they're typically not terribly high in their mark value. That's why you'll see it's only 10% of the semester mark, which is half of the final mark. So all in all, that's 5% of your total mark. So not a great deal. However, the skills are super critical because they will help you pass your second semester test, which, as you can see, is 65% of your semester mark. So the first semester test is a theory test, which will cover some of the theory that we ask, but also it can be theory questions about code. Fill in the code, or what does a particular line of code do, or what's wrong with some code, things like that. It's because this entire course is focused around programming at the end of the day. But it won't be done in a programming environment. It'll be done like a normal test. You'll obviously fill it out digitally. You can, in this case, of course, write out your answers on paper and scan them. We have instructions for a piece of software that will help you scan your a written paper if you would like to write it. Otherwise, you can do it as a digital document from the beginning. And then that's the first semester test, but you'll see it only counts 25% of the semester mark. So only 12.5% of the final mark. Whereas the second semester test counts way more, 65%. This is a practical programming test, which is very important. So the key thing that's really important here, though, is actually on the next page. We take your performance in the course and we calculate something called a practical component mark, which needs to be at least 40% in order to get access to the exam at all. Likewise, your final semester mark needs to be at least 50% to get access to the exam at all. So if you don't participate in the course, if you don't do the practicals, if you don't acquire the skills that are necessary, you won't be allowed to write the exam. You will have failed to meet the entrance requirements for even writing the exam. And how do we calculate the practical component mark? Well, the two components of the course that are fully practical are the second semester test and the practical assignments, both the weekly ones and the online ones I'll show you now. So together those form our 75% of the overall course. So your performance in that portion of the course is converted into a mark out of 100, and that has to be at least 40%. So as an exercise next week when we're learning how to program, we'll write a program that will calculate our practical component mark. So you should all know how to do it because you'll have written the program and have access to videos of a program being written that actually will calculate the practical component mark for people. So, but just bear that in mind. The practical component is very important for the test. So anything that can help get you practice is a good thing. So this additional set of, they're almost like the class tests, because there aren't going to be class tests anymore because there's no class attendance. These virtual programming lab assignments will take the place of class tests, but don't replace your weekly larger programming assignments. Right, there was one question, so I'll take a look at that before I move on to the next section. No, so the question is including the command line notes. The answer is no. Those are not examinable at all. There may be a practical in the future. Typically, there is one just before we do the section called functions, which does make use of command line abilities, which is why it's useful to know. So indirectly, that gets assessed through that practical. But in the second semester test and exam, I can guarantee you that those particular things aren't necessary. It's just part of general computer literacy. So you won't be doing any graphical user interface programs in C++. I sometimes do, and I will do it if we have time, but they've really cut the semester short. What we do as part of the course is we basically write a computer game, and it's a text-based game. And then at the very end, I show you how, if you've structured your code in a sensible way, it's very easy to convert your text-based game into a graphical game. And I'd still really like to show you. I mean, I'll definitely upload the video that does it, whether or not you actually have it in an official class section. So in that sense, there is some graphical part of the course, but the actual weekly assignments and your practical test and your exam don't require any graphical. Yes, it is exactly a 2D array style game. That's precisely what's going to happen. So yeah, so sometimes there's the final practical gives you the option of doing a graphical thing, but I'm not sure if we'll be able to squeeze that in this semester because they've shortened it so much. But you'll definitely get the lecture as a video for how to do that, and the source code for it. So no problem with that as well. All right, so let's continue. All right, so this is a provisional work schedule, which obviously has changed a bit because what was a 11-week semester out of a normal 14-week semester has now required the first week to be orientation. So it's now a 10-week semester out of a 14-week semester that it's supposed to be. So that's unfortunate. As I said, we will pretty much definitely need to use the recess for extra lessons. So in the first week, command line interfaces, which we've shifted to the orientation as discussed, and then we'll discuss some simple mathematics and arithmetic that relates to computer science, as well as a basic theory about computers and programming languages, and the simple building blocks of a C++ program in terms of input, output, and expressions. We might do input, output in a separate week, but it might well be combined with the second week to keep things moving. We'll then take a look at how we give order and structure to our programs through something called control structures. Then there'll be our first semester test, as well as moving on to the section about functions. And it's just before the section on functions that we may make use of some of the command line stuff in a practical, but definitely not in the semester test. And then we will take a look at storing data in a linear fashion in one dimension. If it's textual data, then it's got a special name. It's called a string. You'll have used strings before, but we will go into a bit more detail about what it actually means under the hood for something to be a string in C++ or in the original programming language C came from, C++ came from, called C. We'll then extend that to more than one dimension, but we're keeping the size the same. And then we will relax the constraint that the sizes need to stay fixed and allow for flexible sizes in 1 and 2 dimensions. We'll then take a look at grouping all sorts of different kinds of data into little chunks, and then we will do examples. We may shift the pace of this up a bit to accommodate the further reduced time schedule. The quicker we do things earlier, the more time there is for practice. So I'm in favor typically of trying to get the work covered and then spend more time going through past papers, going through past exams, doing lots and lots of tutorials that go through past papers, so that when you do write your second semester test and your exam, you don't struggle. So just bear that in mind. All right, so yeah, so we'll go through more details as we yes. Okay, saw some questions? So yes, you can use Clang if you want. The stuff we will be doing is definitely portable across Visual Studio or GNU or Clang. It should work perfectly fine on all of them, as long as you make either a CodeBlocks project for submission to keep it easy for your markers, or if you do write a bat file that they can just run, that will compile everything automatically for them, that'll also be okay. So you don't need to switch to Windows. I really don't think. Your code can stay exactly as is. There'll be nothing that requires Windows per se, and even the stuff that uses the command line thing that I hinted at that we'll do just before functions doesn't need Windows. It's the stuff that's so generic that it'll work on Windows, or it'll work on Linux, or it'll work on Mac. So that's not an issue. So you can stick with your Unix operating system. You'll be just fine. Don't worry. And in the second semester, there's one section on dynamic link libraries that you'll need to use Windows for, but that's the only thing. There will not be any group projects. So computer science is a very, at least particularly in the first year, is a very individualistic course. It's not like informatics where there's a focus on group work and projects and project management early on. So we don't want you to work together. This is individual work. Working together is bad. The only people who can help you are the assistants and the lecturers. Your friends don't know how to help you in a way that doesn't actually hurt you, because they'll be tempted to give you the answers instead of showing you how to get the answers yourself, which is counterproductive in terms of actually learning what you need to do. So don't get help from your friends. Where do the assistants help us? So as discussed previously, there is a Discord channel. There's two actually. There's the one just for computer science, where you can ask your questions related to the content in queries text. And then if you need more personal help from an assistant, there is the Axie Virtual Assistance Lab, where you'll see there's channels for the different subjects, and the Computer Science 1 questions get asked in the CSE 1A text or voice channel. The voice channels are limited to 2 people at a time, and the schedule for that is available from Eve. So if we logged on as a regular user, I think that the first year assistants are still registering their times, but you'll be able to see when they're available by clicking on assistant roster, and then they will be available here. IFM 100 is actually a second year subject, so it's already there. But Computer Science 1 is not visible yet. They haven't booked their times, but by next week they should be available. So you'll just find the slot that they're in. During that time, you go to the Axie Virtual Assistance Lab and ask in the channel. The assistants will announce when they start listening, and then they'll be there to help you. The Virtual Assistant Lab you can find on the main page of Eve. There's a notice for it, and the invitation, a permanent invitation to that Discord channel, is available there. So in the first semester, so the question was, do we use C or do we stick to C++? In the first semester, the kind of C++ we write is purely procedural C++. So it's as close to C as you'd really want to get in C++. It's effectively the same. Language. Now, C and C++ are very closely related, and they aren't 100% the same, but they're almost the same. And the style we'll use will be very close to C in some cases, in most cases. So no, we won't use a separate C projects. Everything will be in C++, but in the first semester we stick to the C-like aspects of C++. Eclipse, and this is a compiler for Java, but as far as I know, you can use it for other languages. I've used it for Scala quite happily before I switched to Visual Studio Code for it. So it does do more than just Java. It can do C++ as well. I don't use it for C++, but it is possible. And what platform do we use to run the code? It's, as we discussed yesterday, we use code blocks to run the code. And I will show you an online system we've set up for you to do the shorter class test like weekly assignments. Yep, this course does not require you to have done computer science in matric. It's confusing because you're not used to it. So in the same way that if you try and get fit, you're going to suffer at first. But as you do more exercise, you're going to acquire that fitness. And in the same way that you can't get fit just by watching exercise videos, the only way to get fit is by actually practicing. All right. So as mentioned before, like literally just a few seconds ago, the Axie Virtual Assistant Lab link is on Eve on the front page under the notice Virtual Assistant Lab, and you click on that link, and if you have Discord installed, it'll take you to that channel. So that question has already been answered. How can you practice? You can practice by downloading C++ code blocks like we did yesterday in the video, and then you can work through exercises in the textbook, and there will also be exercises on the virtual practical lab server we're going to look at today. And then the best way to practice is to start working on your weekly practical assignments early so that you can struggle early, so that you can ask for and get help through appropriate channels early. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be writing a test in, if possible, controlled environment on campus with no one but yourself to think to, and you will have to be able to do the things that are required for the course. So remember, the course outcomes are accredited by the British Computer Society, so they don't change just because this is done online. You still need to learn the same things, so you have to practice by practicing. You code in code blocks to solve problems, and there are problems that we'll give you, and there are problems you can find in your textbook or other textbooks, and you just work through them. And if you have difficulty, you ask for help. So if possible, the second semester test and exam will be on campus. The first semester test will not be. We can't promise that because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what kind of announcements the university management is going to make. So the current plan is that the second semester test and exam will be on campus for us, but it may well also be virtual, like it was for last year's group. We don't know, but that's the current plan. You don't have permission on Discord because you've just joined, so you need to join during office hours, then you will be assigned the student role. We did discuss this in yesterday's lecture. Okay, again, also for the exam exemptions that was discussed in yesterday's lecture, please do make sure that you keep up to date with all of the content that's been made available to you. The previous lectures are available from the lecture notes, the notice board, archived video lectures, and you'll see that we discuss the exemption in the class there. All right. Yes, and when we get closer to semester test 1, I'll actually upload all of the past papers for semester test 1 that we've done for the past 10 years or so. So you'll have lots of examples, and then during the tutorials in the week before the first semester test, we'll actually work through past papers as well. So we'll do a lot of practice with semester test 1. Even though it's theory and even though it doesn't count as much as the second semester test, it's still important. So that's what we'll take a look at. And then, yes, it's a good point with programming. The fundamentals are common for most languages. There are a couple of very esoteric languages that work completely differently, but for pretty much all of the languages you'll use in production environments in industry, they will share many, many features that are similar. So what we do in C++ will translate very easily to other programming languages. So, and then there's, as pointed out here, a whole family of languages that share very similar syntax, the way that they look. So C++ and C#, Objective-C, even languages like Java and JavaScript look a lot like C++, although fundamentally they're different under the hood. But the basics that we'll look at here will largely translate to those languages as well. So once you learn a good example of a kind of programming language, you acquire the skills for others. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Delphi. Object Pascal is a perfectly fine programming language. It's just not very widely used. But it is effectively equivalent to C++, or at least as C++ as it was in the early 2000s. Since then, C++ has evolved a lot more than Delphi, but the basics that we'll be doing now would work perfectly well in Object Pascal or C++, no problems. You are learning the basics. So yes, you'll learn the basics from next week. In fact, what we're covering now with the command line arguments and some of the other things are the basics. So classes orientation. So again, this has been discussed previously. So we're going through the learning guide, and I will also show you how to access the virtual programming lab environments. And if we have time, I'll also discuss some of those basics of programming using an example programming language that's very simple, but very close to how your computer actually works under the hood. So it'll maybe give you an idea about how programming works, but that's only if we have time. Otherwise, we might discuss it later on in the semester. It's sometimes used as the basis of a practical, but we may not set a practical like that this semester because we'd like to focus on the things that are closer to the semester test in style. All right, so we were looking at the work schedule, and that's basically the contents that we're going to cover. So you can go into those in more depth, but we'll unpack each of them as we cover them in the course. Very importantly, I did discuss the breakdown of the mark allocation, as well as the existence of the practical component mark made up of your weekly assignments and the virtual programming lab stuff, as well as your second semester test in a 10 out of 75 to 65 out of 75 ratio. And those will determine your practical component mark, which will be used to determine whether you get into the exam. So there's two conditions that let you into the exam. One is the threshold for 40% for the practical component mark. The other one is 50% for your actual semester mark. So they both have to be true to get you into the exam. And then there is a threshold for promoting into the exam. We'll discuss that more as we get closer to there. But if you do well enough in the course, you don't have to write the exam. But this might not apply to engineering students. I just need to check whether they're allowed to promote as well, but I suspect that they might not be. So I just want to confirm that. All right, so that is that. So let's now take a look at these weekly assignments that you get. We discussed the main programming assignments that you get week by week that will build up to become more like the exam. So we saw that we got those from practicals, and you currently have one called the orientation exercise that is due on Friday. And then on Friday, you'll get another exercise, which will be your first actual practical due the following week. So those are our goals. This one doesn't count for marks. It's just practice in how you will submit your weekly practicals going forward. So that is one kind of exercise. The other kind of exercise makes use of a web system that we set up, and this is the second year we're using it, but the last year we just used it for bonus practicals in Computer Science 1B. This time we're using it much more extensively in Computer Science 1A as well. At the moment, you don't have access to the system because people are still registering, and we want to add people in one big batch once they've registered. So next week, at the beginning of the week, when hopefully most people have sorted out their registration, we will add people to this other system, and you will have your access to it. But the system is located here. It's located at a URL called axie.cloud. So Axie is the name of the academy. It's the Academy for Computer Science and Software Engineering. So if you go to it, you'll see that this is our virtual practical assessment area, and you'll see that there is a module for Computer Science 1A VPL. VPL stands for the Virtual Programming Lab. So how do I log in? Okay, we've got a question. Nope, I don't know. So SSH is a terminal for accessing securely text-based systems. There's no text-based interface that you're going to be using to connect to a server or anything like that. So no. If you want to SSH into servers, you'll have to find servers to do that. I guess some environments are based on SSH. Ours is web based, so it's not a bad question, but we won't be working that way. The way in which ours is set up, your programs will actually run on a completely separate computer to the user interface to keep them perfectly safe. The danger with SSH-based systems is if you know what you're doing, even without very high user privileges, you're capable of bringing down the entire server. So no, not even like that. So if this is set up correctly, you'll only be able to delete your own work, and then that's your own fault. But there are ways to bring down the entire server, not permanently, but requiring a reboot using just basic terminal commands and no special privileges. I will not teach you how to do that, but they do exist. So for that reason, we don't set up a text-based server and then you connect to it via a terminal program and run your code there. It's basically similar to that. So this is close, but I won't elaborate. So you're welcome to enjoy yourselves with that. But the system we use runs your program in an isolated jail, and then if you exceed time and memory and CPU usage constraints, your programs are automatically killed. So it should be safe. And then even if you do bring the whole thing down, it's not the same system where your marks are being managed. So it really doesn't matter. So we try to keep it separated. Right. Anyway, so this is the system, Axie.cloud. Your login will be basically it'll be your student number with VPL dot in front of it. Now, I repeat, your credentials have not been set up on the system yet. It doesn't exist. So you can't log in with your account and do anything just yet. So click on the module, you type in your login details, and then the question becomes, where do you find your password? So at the moment, you haven't been assigned a password yet, but this user has been. So they find it under marks, and your VPL password will be available as a mark field. So you will copy the entire password, except for the final /0. That /0 is just because this is a mark field, and it assumes that the test is out of something. So for example, the orientation exercise is also out of 0, and this VPL password is out of 0. So you copy everything except for that /0 from your mark field, and you use that to log in to the virtual practical assessment server. And that did not work. What have I done wrong here? Oops. Well, I'll just have to use a different one. That's the process will be set up for you next week, so hopefully it should work for everyone. Okay, so that other test account has been set up, and here you will see the kind of like class test equivalents, but you'll see that they're basically tied to a particular practical. So the skills that you need for a particular practical will be assessed in these assignments, and they will build up towards the final set of skills that you need for the second semester test and the exam. They're not all visible to you yet, but they'll be added to on a week-by-week basis, and they'll cover the skills for that basic week. So there have been a couple of questions since I did that, so I'm just going to switch back to the question feed now. Okay. All right, okay, so none of those are actual questions. So, but yes, so this is one way of doing the bad thing that I spoke about. If the sys server has been set up properly, it won't work, which we really think that this practice environment has been set up properly. But as I said, even if it goes wrong, this isn't where your marks are stored. So it's not a crisis. All right, okay. Now the question about what the best CPU and RAM is for C++ to run smoothly, it very much depends on what you're doing. Now, the kind of stuff you need for Computer Science 1A and B, to be honest, will work on any computer that was made in the last 20 years. So you'll be perfectly fine. If you're doing both informatics and computer science, then the specifications for Visual Studio will be the ones that your laptop or whatever it is you're using will need to meet. But for Computer Science 1, it's very low spec. Do you have a tutorial after the session? That's a very easy question to answer. Please familiarize yourself with the timetable. And as you can see, there is no tutorial on a Wednesday. The tutorials on a Wednesday have already happened. So, all right. So thank you. All right, so here we go. Let's continue. So we've logged in and we can see that we've got these virtual programming assignments. So I'll just take a look at the first one, which is the basic hello world that you would have seen in your weekly programming assignments that's due on Friday. You wouldn't have had to write anything. It's just the default one that's created by the system. So if you click on it, you can see then that the details for the assignment are given to you in this area. So there are a couple of them, and as you'll see next week, they do relate to the weekly practical that you're doing for that week, so they're there to help you build those skills. And if you click on Edit, the system will switch over to a virtual programming environment and ask you to name your file. Now, it's very important that whatever you name your file, it ends in .cpp, because it's based on the file name that it will know what to do with it. In fact, I strongly recommend, and in fact, much insist, that for these early ones, you name your file main.cpp. So if we click OK there, it will then open up a little programming environment. It's a bit small at the moment, but you can click on that to maximize the programming environment. The summary of what you need to do is over here, and the programming environment itself is over there. And I did hear 1 or 2 questions, so before I write out the Hello World program, I will just check to see what people were asking about. So this Axie Cloud, the VPL system, is for you to practice. It's a programming environment that will run in the web browser. Well, actually, your code runs on a server, a jail server far away, but that doesn't matter. You write your code in the environment here, and you'll be able to run it even if you haven't installed code blocks on your computer. So strictly speaking, as long as you have access to a web browser, you can at least practice. And the system is sufficient for the stuff that you need for this semester. So for people who are struggling with installing code blocks and whatnot, this is an alternative. You'll still need to submit your stuff to the Eve for the weekly practicals, the bigger practicals. You could do that without a code blocks project. It would still be markable. But this at least gives you a programming environment to practice in and build skills. Will it always be main.cpp? No, it won't. In future, once we've gone a bit further, you'll have additional files to represent libraries of functionality that you create. So as long as the format is CPP, no matter which programming app, I'm not quite sure I understand. So as long as the format is C++, so C++ is a language, and any compiler that understands that language will be able to produce executables for you. So as long as the code you write conforms to the rules of that language, you will be okay. Okay, so why do you use so many platforms? You're confused? Look, you don't have to use this. It's there as an option for you. The only one that's required for you is code blocks. So if you want to limit yourself to one programming environment, then only use code blocks. The marks for the VPL assignments will only be bonus marks, but you're welcome to skip that if you don't want them. That's fine by me. So no, again, if you don't, these virtual assessments are there to help you, and they will be linked to the code that you're working on that week. So doing them will help you, and we will take your participation into consideration when calculating your practical component mark, but only in a way that benefits you. You won't lose marks, but you can gain marks. So I would think that it's silly to not do it. Right, the official channel for this is not WhatsApp. The official channel is Discord. So please join the Discord server. The invitation is available on Eve under notices. For the subject, so there's the one for the virtual assistance lab for general contact with the assistants during their assisting hours. And this is the Discord server where the lecturers will be monitoring to ask. So there's no official WhatsApp group for this course. This official channel is Discord. All right. There's bonus, not for using it over code blocks. This is supplementary. This exists to help you because the individual VPL assignments will be linked to what your practical assignment is going to be. So as I said, you're welcome to not do it, but it's silly to avoid that help as well as to avoid the bonus marks that you would receive from having used it, because they count as your class tests. So as you can see in the learning guide, all of those marks go into a pool, and it's 10% of your of your semester mark, which is 5% of your final mark. So that's that. So I'm not going to go into too much details about what the code means this week because we're just doing orientation, but we will go through that next week. So this may look familiar to you as being the code that you saw when you generated the default project with code blocks like we did yesterday. So we'll unpack exactly what all of that means. But this will show you the process of actually working on the server. So I'm just going to output hello world. And we can save it. And we can run it. And as you'll see, it runs the program and it does what it's supposed to do. Now, this particular version, I've actually run it before on this machine. So there's one thing that you might not see if you haven't connected to that computer before. So I'm just going to run it on a different browser so that you can see something that you might not have seen. I've actually connected to it before. Okay, so if I go back, and we see that the code is still there. If I run here, it should display a message about the security certificates for the part of the system that actually runs your code. So the first time you run this, and if we ever reboot that machine, you might see this again in the future. It's basically saying you need to accept the security certificate in order to run the code on the execution server. So you simply click on the details for that. You have to accept it. And then once that's done, it will continue. And from then on, you won't need to do it again unless we actually reboot the server and it generates a new certificate. And then the system is basically just complaining that it hasn't seen that computer before. Do you trust it to run your code? And well, if you want the code to run on it, then the answer is basically yes. So that's broadly what those messages mean. So let me go back to whatever questions you may have. So let's go back here. So yes, there's bonus marks for using it just because it's a different kind of practice. It replaces your class tests. So this is the thing you use for practice. But for your weekly assignments and for your semester tests and for your exam, you use code blocks. Is it possible to code on a phone? Now, technically, yes. You could connect to the system with a tablet or with a phone, and it would work. All you need is a web browser, preferably one that's based on Chrome. So the new Microsoft Edge or Chrome will work fine. Firefox also does work fine, but you won't see the exact same error messages when you connect it for the first time that you saw with me. So it might look slightly different, but those are your choices there. Yes, now obviously it's much slower doing it on the web-based system, so it's there as if you can run stuff on your own computer, it's definitely got to be a much quicker experience for you. Oh yes, no, okay, that's a perfect question. No. So as long as your code is in the format for submission that we discussed in the orientation assignment, you can use whatever you want to actually code it. You can use Visual VS Code, you can use Eclipse, you can use Sublime, you can use whatever you want. I don't mind, as long as you formatted your code and your submission properly. I do just ask, though, that you either make sure you include a code blocks project for the assistants to run, or that you write a batch file for compiling everything. Okay, then you come up with your own code. Yes, you absolutely must come up with your own code. The purpose of this course is to teach you to create code. So you don't get help from anyone. You don't take code from the internet. You don't do any of those things. All you do is learn how to write code yourself. Right. Okay, all right. So code blocks, if you look at yesterday's slide, yesterday's lecture, you'll see that we download the code blocks browser IDE and install it. We'll also upload a PDF with screenshots for people who don't want to go through the video. System we use, if you want to pause the code that's running, system pause is a perfectly fine way of doing it. Okay, we'll discuss what all of these things mean next week. Remember, at the moment, we're just doing the orientation exercises. The actual learning of the C++ will only start next week. All right, so I think that's that. I'm getting prompted by the system that the end of the scheduled time has been reached. So the system is going to disconnect us pretty soon. So I'd rather go out on my own terms and wish you all a good evening. So I think that's that. We covered how to access the VPL system. You won't have access to it yet, but from next week you should have access to it. So good evening, and try to do the orientation exercise. If you don't, it doesn't count for marks, but it's good practice for the weekly assignments which do count for marks. So from next week, we're starting with basic C++ expressions, and I think we'll also include input and output from there directly. So it'll be weeks 1 and 2 of the work schedule. All right, so I'm going to stop recording now.